Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Hertie School event, Ready for Change, how coalition talks are shaping Germany's top policy issues, society, climate, and digitization. My name is Cornelius Adebar. I'm a fellow with Hertie School, and it's my pleasure to chair tonight's event, the panel discussion that we will have on the German government formation process. Everyone will have noted that we could hardly have chosen a better date for this, even maybe a better hour. A lunch discussion would have been different. Now we have a pre-dinner discussion with us, and we very much look forward to this. As the topic says, it's about the main issues that are relevant for Germany in the near future that this coalition will have to deal with, climate, digitization, and the societal changes that have become apparent over the past years. In particular, the pandemic is a big issue, as the coalition partners have made clear right from the very beginning. They have little time to spare. They have to dive directly into fighting the pandemic. But this one issue is more of a cross-cutting issue. What we want to focus on are these future-oriented topics that we have laid out. And we will do so with a splendid panel, which I'm very happy to welcome already now. We have Sigrid Rosteutscher, who's a professor at the Department of Social Science at Goethe-Universität Frankfurt. Birgit Schwarz, who just until recently was the ORF, the Austrian Broadcasting's chief correspondent here in Berlin, and is now transitioning back to Vienna to lead the correspondence network of ORF. And two colleagues from Hertie School, Turit Husted, Professor of Public Administration and Management, and Christian Flaxland, who is the Professor of Sustainability and the Director of the Hertie School's Center for Sustainability. If you had the time to either watch the press conference this afternoon, maybe dive already into the coalition treaty that was published, you will actually see that the issues that we have put out there are also figuring very, very prominently in the coalition treaty. These are part of the transformation, the societal transformation towards a more digitized, a more climate-oriented society, but also putting public administration and the functioning of a state, a modern state, very much at the center of the new coalition's endeavors. And these are all Hertie topics. And so we're very happy that we can have this discussion here tonight. We can do so with the support of the Open Society Foundations, for which we're very grateful. They have supported us throughout the year with a series of events that we could have. And there is one person that I have not yet introduced, and that's Andrea Römmele, my dear friend and colleague from the Hertie School, who will set us off because she's the one person following all those political conversations, developments, the campaigning, and now the coalition forming. She's been following these things very closely. So we're very eager to hear from you first. How do you see this? What do you make of today's announcements? And you can get us going for the discussion that we'll have on the panel. Later on, then everyone can join, and I very much look forward to that. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Yeah, Cornelius, thank you very much for this very kind and warm introduction. A warm welcome also from my side, and a big thank you also to the Open Society Foundations for organizing this event and pulling this lecture series off together with us. We started at the beginning of the year with the regional elections in Baden-Wurttemberg and Rhineland-Palatinate, then talked about policy issues. We had foreign policy, climate. Then we talked about the outcome of the German election at the end of September. And as you rightly pointed out, Cornelius, we couldn't have picked a better date. The only downside is, yes, I have watched the press conference, but I did not have time yet to go through the I think it's slightly less than 200 pages coalition contract. Yes, the issues we will discuss, society, climate, digitalization, are very prominent from various angles. But perhaps I can kick off with sort of one observation that really carries through from the beginning of the coalition talks, which, to be very honest, partly started already before the election, because the Greens and the FDP already met before September 26th. And there was this sort of little joke in Berlin cafes and so on, that they would meet and actually they wouldn't care who would become chancellor, quote unquote, under them. But what has been remarkable is that there really seems to be a new style of politics emerging, you know, and we saw that today in the press conference. Very appreciative of one another, a new level of collegiality. I mean, when you heard Christian Lindner praising Olaf Scholz, saying he would be a spectacular chancellor, honestly, that's something you haven't seen before. Right. Also, the way the coalition debates took place. I mean, I'm looking a little bit at you, Birgit, from a journalistic perspective. This probably was really hard, right? Because there was almost nothing that leaked through, and perhaps that's something I can share in this round. I had a guest speaker in one of my seminars last week, and she was one of the leaders of the negotiation teams. And I actually invited her to talk about campaigns in my seminar, but I did say, you know what, if you want to talk about the coalition negotiations, fine with us. And she answered, and I found that really remarkable. She said, no, we are not allowed to. And whichever group leaks has to go back to the negotiation table, everything going back to zero. And I found that quite remarkable, I must say. As I said, you know, a new style of politics is emerging. Let's see whether that remains. What I also found striking is sort of the narrative the coalition gave itself, right? And that's always something I was curious to find out, because keep in mind, you know, those are three parties that are actually quite far apart. Especially the FDP is. At the beginning, I thought, you know, this is going to be a real challenge to build bridges and find something in common. And I was always hoping for a sort of a big narrative that unites not only the three coalition partners, but also perhaps, you know, brings people in, because basically what you need a narrative people buy into. Right. And when I read the narrative this afternoon, and I'm trying to translate it from German into English, and I would say, dare to more progress, mehr Fortschritt wagen. And it very strongly relates to the narrative Willy Brandt chose 1969, dare to more democracy. Right. We can do big things together. Let's just dare to do it. And I found that as a narrative, I found that quite remarkable because that is really what it needs. It needs these brackets to keep the three coalition partners together. And on a last note, Cornelius, you already alluded to that. I mean, this coalition, with this gigantic transformation task in front of itself, starts in the middle of a heavy crisis. Right. So before going into details of the coalition treaty, Olaf Scholz alluded to the corona crisis and said what the traffic light coalition wants to do. In some aspects, compulsory, in some parts or for specific jobs, compulsory vaccinations, a bonus for those people who work in hospitals and in caring institutions, and a sort of a unit, honestly, something like a quote unquote war room unit within the Chancellery that monitors the pandemic 24/7 and has a daily reporting line to the Chancellor. That's how it was kicked off. We have experts here on the various fields we want to talk about: society, climate, and digitalization. And I'm very much looking forward to your input. And I give the word back to you, Cornelius.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you for painting the vivid picture that you've just painted of how the coalition came together with the pre-talks even before election day, some of the juicy bits during those negotiations, what could be said and what couldn't be said, and also giving your impression and putting it into a framework of what this will mean for the upcoming 4 years. Turning to the panel, and thank you also, Andrea, for staying on and coming back whenever you feel like. Turning to the panelists, I would like to start with Turid, who is our public administration expert. And just give us your ideas. I don't know how struck you were by the modern state, the modernization of the state being, I think, the first paragraph in the first paper that came out in the Sondierungspapier, in the preliminary talks. Now it has again, besides the crisis, the urgency of the crisis, has had gained prominence. Is this really a government that will change the makeup of the state? Will it make the government more functional? We've heard so much about federalism and the problems. And how far do you really think is this going to go in the transformation? But Turid, thank you.
Thanks, Cornelius. Yeah, well, I think this would have been my first sentence, actually, what you were just saying, that I was surprised when this first paper has been published a couple of weeks ago, which became called the Sondierungspapier, that the coalition parties in their talks had actually made the modern state, administrative reform, digitalization as the #1 topic, or as the first topic in their list of policies they are going to address. I found that quite remarkable, and I, of course, was when the coalition agreement has been published this afternoon. The first I've been doing was checking, okay, where is it now, and is it still the first on the list, and what have they put in? And I have to say now, I just printed this section, and it's 10 pages, so it's quite a long elaboration, in particular a long list of ideas, aims, ambitions that they have put out there, and that refer to the modernization of the state, so very sort of general administrative reforms, and also digitalization. I think this is important, that it's not only about not just focusing on digitalization, but that it puts the two topics, or that it focuses on both topics and discusses them together. So digitalization on the one hand, and administrative reform, public sector modernization on the other hand. And going through these 10 pages just quickly, of course, this afternoon, I have to say, I think they have outlined quite an ambitious list of what they are going to do, or what they want to do. Now they have to deliver. That is the first thing. But what I also think is, and I find that remarkable, in some respects, it fits exactly to what Andrea has been saying before, to this overall narrative of, dare to more progress, because they do not only refer to the more technical part, the digitalization of public service delivery, areas in which we have seen some progress also over the last years, but what they also do, and I think this reflects the narrative, or translates the narrative to this particular section of the agreement, is that they say, okay, for example, we have to improve or work on, and want to work on, the organizational culture or the administrative culture, particularly also on how leadership is actually carried out in the federal ministries, for example. And so I think this is, this, for example, fits into this narrative. And what also fits into this is that and this also goes back to the Willy Brandt narrative, is that it's the first time, actually, since the early 1970s, that these topics, so how should we think about the state, how can we, what structures and processes and culture for an effective state are needed for a state or an administration that is actually able to address all these policies and problems that we outline in later sections of the agreement. So that is actually the first time, again, that it's as high on the political agenda now. So I think this also speaks to the Brandt narrative in some respect. But of course, now they have to deliver. And administrative reform is not the easiest reform area you can think of. So that is quite something. And what they have not yet, or what's not in there, and what I think what will be very important to as a starting point, and also to assess sort of more precisely in which way it will go, and what their chances are to deliver, is actually how will they organize for doing all this. So there was this, it's not clear yet, or it's not, doesn't say anything on, will there be a change in the competencies for administrative reform or public sector innovation, as we call the more recent innovation or reform paradigm, right? Will it remain in the Ministry for Interior as it used to be traditionally, or will it change? There was a lot of, or will they sort of decentralize it more? They say, okay, we are committed to, for example, have more innovation labs in the federal government. That sounds like a bit of a more decentralized approach, but overall, someone has to do it, and someone has to have the responsibility for it, and has to be accountable for it. Otherwise, I think this is what we know from years of administrative reform research. You need political leadership. So some political focus. We can say, okay, now we have a programmatic starting point here. There is some political focus, political leadership, but now we need someone who is responsible for implementing it and for delivery. And I'm looking forward actually to see what's coming in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Turit, and thank you for giving us a first deep dive into this. We'll pick up on more of these issues during the discussion. But since you mentioned the marriage between modern administration and digitization, there is another topic that always is mentioned alongside digitization, and that's climate change. That's the green transformation. And with that, I'll hand it over to Christian Flaxland to give us his first reading of what we all know is a long document that we have only superficially been able to read over the past hours. But Christian, what is your first take?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Cornelius. And indeed, I've been scrambling for the past now 2.5 hours to read and interpret this document and to think about whether the targets that we have and the policies and the governance fit together. And I'd like to structure my input in terms of talking about targets quickly, policies, and governance structures. So the starting point really is we have very ambitious climate targets in place at the EU level, and the German targets actually are embedded in the EU targets. And in general, climate policy in Germany is to the largest extent EU climate policy. Interestingly, the coalition treaty supports the EU policy proposed by the Commission, and I think that's even the most important sentence in there. The government, or the coalition government, supports the Fit for 55 proposal by the Commission, but doesn't talk very much about that beyond this. So more on this later, but I think this is really key. We have ratcheted up our national target in summer. So the Klimaschutzgesetz, our Climate Change Act, the target was made more ambitious after the judgment of our Supreme Court. Actually, in reality, that was anticipating what we need to do on the EU level to implement the Green Deal and the new, more tightened target there, what we need to do anyways, right? So Germany was more of anticipating the reforms that we need to do at the EU level over the next 1 to 2 years anyways. And just, I'm talking about targets for a moment because also Habeck actually started his presser today with targets, and he said, well, actually, we decided to not further tighten those targets because they are actually already very ambitious. And I think it's not clear that we actually will achieve them. I think they are achievable, but it's as well possible that we just miss them. And we really need to take this into account. And so this is the biggest industrial transformation in Germany since the Second World War, basically. So we're going to phase out combustion cars within 15 years. We're going to decarbonize airplane fuels. We're going to decarbonize our industry, exchange our entire heating system, and renovate our building stock. So these are huge things we need to do within just a few years. So the question is the policy mix up to it? Actually, the old government ratcheted up the targets. They didn't touch the policies. They left it to this government. So I was looking today. So, okay, is this sufficient now? Does this match, at least qualitatively? And I wonder, and my interpretation is what they do is they do adopt a lot of detailed measures in sectors, in particular in renewable energy. So there's a target now of 80% renewable energies in 2030 with an increased projection of the demand for renewable energies. So that's more than doubling our renewable energies within the next 8 years, basically. So this is going to be a huge effort to do this, and they want to implement planning processes that are much faster than in the past. So it's going to be a huge public administration and coordination task also among the Bund, the Länder, the municipalities. So I'm actually quite confident this is going to happen because everybody knew this has to be done. So I think we're rolling there, and the Energiewende in the energy sector is on track. I'm more wondering about transport, buildings, agriculture almost, but transport and buildings, this is where I looked closely, and in the end, the main instrument to me seems to really be carbon pricing. So there's a word that, or the Commission proposed to introduce a second carbon pricing system at the European Union level from 2026, which would actually be modeled after our domestic German carbon pricing system we introduced 2 years ago, or which started this year. And that's it. So the reference is to carbon pricing there. And then the coalition treaty also talks about carbon pricing in a section on socially acceptable energy prices, and basically says, but we're not going to increase the German carbon price now. We're not going to do anything now. Things are going to stay like they are, but we'll follow the EU Commission proposals, which means, okay, actually we'll see much higher carbon prices in the future because these might get as high as 200 euros in 2030 or even more, which is 50 cent to €1 of gasoline price increase if you translate it into that metric. So I think in the background, they sort of have the stick of carbon pricing, and they also think about how to do that in a just way and to compensate people like poorer income groups through a Klimageld, they call it now. And I think that's very good, it's very important, but they didn't want to put it up front in communications in terms of high energy prices and Corona, etc. It's understandable from a political perspective. I still think the signal of ratcheting up targets, but not adjusting the carbon price that we have in place, which actually was not even sufficient to achieve the old targets, so we were not even on track for the old targets, is a bit of a strange signal, and we basically will need to pin down this government and the following government to actually ratchet up the ambition and to achieve the targets in the years to come. So it's again, it feels like a delay again of important measures for political reasons, and of course this has been the story in climate policy all along. Perhaps one more word then only on governance. Obviously, the Greens secured important ministries like this new ministry, economic and climate. Let's see what exactly the competences will be. So obviously industry and renewable energies. Not sure what other competences they will precisely have. And also they got environment and agriculture. That's all not a big surprise. The big surprise obviously is transport, along with digitization. And Volker Wissing heading that. If you would have asked me 5 hours ago, and actually for the past 6 months, which is the ministry that the Greens should secure, I would have said, well, transport. Because one thing that we learned with the renewable energy sector was that in 2002, after we got the Renewable Energy Act, the act alone did not achieve very much. It was the remodeling of the entire regulatory infrastructure that got the Energiewende rolling, and the same will need to happen in the transport sector. Similarly in the building sector. So let's see what the SPD makes out of this. So a bit surprised to see the Greens giving transport and buildings away. Of course, there's always negotiations in these coalition talks, but that they opted for foreign ministry and family is a bit surprising to me, but then of course there's politics to that. Just a final word, climate policy as digitization is a cross-cutting challenge par excellence. This is acknowledged, which is nice. There also seems to be a cooperative spirit here, which is a nice contrast to the past 20 years, where usually the divides had been along party lines of the ministries, and then cooperation only happened with the ministries of the same color or the gleiche Farbe, so the same party. How exactly coordination will be organized remains opaque to me. There's mentioning of the climate cabinet, but that's only in the climate diplomacy part. So I think it seems they have plans for that, but they're not in that document, very similar to what Ture just noted. And with that, I'd like to stop here, and there's much more to discuss, but I think I need to end.
No, thank you very much. Very insightful. And yes, as you say, sometimes there is politics to these things that we will also try to dig a little bit deeper in. But there are also many of the issues that you've put out, the targets, the policies, and the governance structures that are worthwhile looking further into. But before we do that, with regard especially to the climate discussion, Sigrid, she's an expert on societal affairs, I should say. So we want to hear from you a little bit about how you see these elements being tackled in the coalition treaty, the idea of what German society, European societies have gone through over the past 1.5, 2 years. Lots has been debated about cohesion, social cohesion, resilience. I mean, do you see these topics somehow reflected in the coalition treaty or in the ambition of this three-party government?
No, you surprised me quite a lot. I thought I've been invited as an electoral researcher, not as an expert in social cohesion. So I wanted to
that's my bad,
enter this discussion with saying I'm the lucky one who is not depending on reading coalition treaties, because the voters spoke already. And what I want to bring in are two observations about what the voters' motives might mean then for coalition building and the coalition running in the long run. So since I'm involved in election studies, that is since 2009, we always thought this election is sort of the new high and end point of turmoil, levels of party change, voter volatility. But no, each subsequent election tells us it can all be topped. So based on a basic observation that parties have two basic interests. They want to get policies enacted, realize their substantial programs and do whatever is necessary, and they want to get re-elected. They want to maximize votes, which is often congruent, but not always. I guess the most striking example of successful policy reforms that seriously undermine voter bases is the Hartz IV reform. Huh? So based on this, in this first round, I will offer two observations. I believe this was the one most candidate-centered campaign ever. So issues, programmatic experts from the voter perspective in their decision-making hardly played a role in explaining voting behavior. But there is one striking exception. Voters with a strong preference for climate change, ending climate change, anti-climate change policies were, not very surprisingly, a strong predictor of voting for the Greens. What, however, is surprising is that also the Liberals profited from voters with strong anti-climate change preferences. I don't know whether the Liberals know that. Huh? So there seems to be one issue public concerned with climate change, but apparently differing on the means, the preference how to reach it. But they seem to share a similar goal. For the Social Democrats, from a voter perspective, almost only the candidate counted. You can throw in the models whatever you want. It's preference for Scholz, which makes the vote choice for the Social Democrats. Also, Lindner had some effect, but nothing like this, maybe a little surprisingly for the Greens. So what does that mean? Candidate absolutely overwhelming for the Social Democrats, nothing at all like this for the Greens, but one single issue which was really electorally relevant. The Greens are in this new coalition most strongly under pressure to deliver on their core issue. The others, and this is particularly the case for the SPD, are far more flexible with regard to policy content. The Social Democrats have to deliver upon performance of Olaf Scholz. So to sum it up, this first observation, the Greens need to be successful in terms of policy content and output, the SPD in terms of leadership, and the FDP, the Liberals, are somewhere in between. So that is a bit my observation on basis of the motives of electoral choices. And the second observation I'd like to share with it is the strongly different age distribution of the party's electorate. So the Social Democrats are by far, and really by far, strongest among those voters who are 70 years old and older. And they even lost vote share among young voters. And the gain of 10 percentage points among the old voters is largely due to gains from previously CDU-CSU voters. So presumably long-time Christian Democrat voters who believe that Scholz can be more trusted to continue the Merkel way than their own candidate. So the Social Democrats won the election with a promise of stability, because it were these old voters who really made a difference. These 70-year-old plus, they had for a quite large segment left the CDU-CSU and went to the Social Democrats. Greens and Liberals, by contrast, by far strongest among youngest voters. The Liberals even lost among older voters. Now, looking at this picture from previous elections, that was slightly similar. However, this election really exaggerated the strikingly different age distribution. The Social Democrats were, like the Christian Democrats, always biased towards the old, but because of this influx of additional older voters and the loss of younger voters, the party became even more a party of older voters, while the Liberals in particular, but also the Greens, had gains more among younger voters and then among older voters. So the age distribution got really exaggerated, bigger than it was always before. Now, if I simplify this a little bit, what does it mean? That Liberals and the Greens got strongest support from voters who expect serious policy reforms, the young ones. In terms of representation, this is of course good. The traffic light coalition is much better than the Grand Coalition, which was always heavily biased towards support from the older segments of the electorate. But we have here an inherent, and I guess presumably lasting source of conflict within the coalition, because Scholz and the SPD, they need to deliver stability. That's what their voters want, while the Greens and the Liberals need to bring reform and change. And these are the two observations I wanted to offer in this first round, and I guess we can talk about a lot of other things in the second and the third round.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sigrid. And while I may have asked the different questions, I feel that your answer, or even your presentation, actually also responded to some of those points. I mean, the division within the society between the elder and the younger generation, those wanting stability, those wanting change, the prevalence of the issue of climate change across party lines. I mean, obviously very much focused on the Greens, but also with other parties. And as you rightly put out, maybe appreciating different instruments, not bans, but incentives, to be very blunt, in this green-yellow differentiation. But since we've already started to dig deeper into how the election actually turned out, I also want to bring in Birgit, who, as an astute observer of the Berlin field of policymaking here, plus with the benefit of being an outsider, you're very deeply versed into it, but you can take yourself back and tell us how do you see this? What is it that you pick up on the issues that the other panelists have mentioned? I know you have a couple of insights into the coalition making also as a journalist, as a well-connected journalist. What is your take on where we stand today with a party coalition?
Yeah, it was a very exciting day for me because, as you said, as an observer, first let me say hello to everyone. Good evening. I'm very happy to be joining you on this very special day. As has been mentioned before, we now have a three-party coalition in Germany on the way that is formed by not very likely partners. And it was very interesting what you just said, Sigrid, because the three parties that are bound together now have also a very different take on what the state's role should be in this huge transformation, this huge transition Germany needs, or the parties feel that Germany needs to undergo. And it's very interesting because the three coalition partners have identified the need for reforms in three main areas: climate protection, has been said already, digitization, and a strong push to reorganize not only the German state and the German bureaucracy, but the German welfare state with a very strong social component. And these are huge areas for disagreement between these three parties. It's really, really interesting. And what I learned today is I listened very closely to what was said at the press conference, but I also watched the body language, and the mood, as Andrea has pointed out at the beginning, was very somber because they talked about coronavirus pandemic and measures to overcome it. But there was sort of the initial euphoria is gone. They have lost a little bit of their momentum and also a little bit of, their enthusiasm. And I think Robert Habeck, the Green Party leader, put it, he said, we fought really hard. We had hard and direct discussions, and for more than once, sort of, there was a threat to fail in these talks because the outlook from an FDP perspective to how should we deal with things is so different from the outlook the Greens and the Social Democrats have. The Greens and the Social Democrats agree very much on the fact that the state has to play a very important role, and the Freedom Party would like to let the markets play it out. And I've talked to many people close to the negotiations, and the deals that have been struck are reflected now in the distribution of the ministries. So basically, on each policy issue where there is huge controversy, you have basically kind of Spiegelministerien. So you have always two people from two different parties who must agree to bring one big issue forward. This for me is very interesting. And then there was one question that has been asked several times but not answered. And this is the question of how will these three parties be able to deliver on the promise that they gave again today, that they will bring about this huge transformation of the German economy without social or economic cost? Basically, what they promised today is that they will put Germany on a very quick path to climate action and keep the living standards for everybody. And at the same time, make a deep reform of the social welfare state without cuts. On the contrary, not only without cuts, but even with promises to give more. And this for me is sort of the greatest question that remains after this day today. How on earth is Germany going to finance all this transition with a finance minister, Christian Lindner, from the FDP, who has promised that there won't be any tax raises and there will not be more debt? So this to me is sort of really the great question they have to answer. Otherwise, this remains a very ambitious paper, but it will be very difficult to be put into action. This is my take on the day today.
Thank you very much, Birgit, and thank you for presenting your insights into how these things have come together, how the coalition treaty has to be read with the mirroring ministries and trying to find compromises throughout. I can see that you've already put some questions in the chat, which is great. I would like to encourage the panelists, though, from refraining to respond immediately in the chat. We will pick up the questions as they come and as they fit. And I want to go back to Turid again. Let's deal with this fundamental reform of the state thing first. And there was also a question that came up, the skepticism of technology. How can Germans that have to deal with the administration and seem to prefer the face-to-face if they can get an appointment, how can they work with the attempts to digitize the ministries? Is this something that that the coalition has been talking about? Is there some background knowledge as to how to do it? Some good practices from other countries? How can we actually work on these issues?
Thank you, Cornelius. Well, I think two things are important here. First is that when we speak of public service delivery, so for citizens and so on, there is a high and increasing demand indeed for digital public services, right? And with the Online Zugangsgesetz, so this administrative online act or digital online act that has been or that is in the part of or in the phase of implementation right now, some digital services are or there are some improvement when it comes to digital public service delivery. And I think this is much needed and much requested also. And we know this also from a number of empirical surveys. So there's a lot of demand for that and also pressure. And there are many other. Germany lags far behind in all international, by all international comparisons, in particularly when it comes to digital public service delivery. And second, we have this. I think the pandemic brought to light or brought to the attention of a greater public how sort of old-fashioned the ordinary working procedures in major parts of the German public sector actually still are. So I think there is only now, or only for the last year or 18 months or so, there's a growing recognition that there is indeed a need for reform. And so this is the famous fax machines, right, with which the health agencies are apparently communicating, and that I think has been a surprise to many citizens. And this is sort of my answer here would be that this is actually turning into support for modernization. There may be a couple of exceptions, and this is, for example, when it comes to the use of AI or to algorithmic support in decision-making procedures and so on. But in general, I would very much say, and this is also, I think there is a bit of empirical data that would support. There is indeed much support from among the citizens. First, and second, I think I would leave it with this for now.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's encouraging at least. But if you look deeper into what the coalition is planning now, and with all the experience that you have of public sector, public administration reform or public sector innovation, as you called it. Let me renew my question. What are the examples that this government should draw upon in reforming the state, in making it more modern? I know that, very often some Baltic states are cited, but they are not comparable in terms of size to a 16-Länder federal state. But how would you go about this if you had this task written into the treaty now, and what would you recommend?
Well, I think this is 3 or 4 questions even, right? And I think what I would find most important from a federal government perspective now is first start with the federal government itself, with the ministries. And what I think is most important, and that also has a number of effects on for sustainability policy or climate change, and Christian actually also already alluded to it, is strengthening and rethinking about or strengthening cross-departmental or inter-ministerial coordination. There is a major need actually for more joint activities and for a better collaboration and coordination between the ministries. And there are a number of I think, ideas around or examples. When you look to Finland, for example, Finland is always a front runner in actually reflecting on and reforming and thinking about how ministries could work together, for example. And this would, in my understanding at least, indeed need to be supported by a change in the administrative culture, because many countries know this silo mentality and silo thinking. This is just very typical, but in this country, for a number of reasons, it is particularly widespread, you could say, or particularly relevant to the way the government works. And thinking when we look at all of these cross-cutting issues, climate change, sustainability, I think this needs urgent political attention. And there's a widespread, there is this reform agenda, public sector innovation, I think, which is particularly addresses, or the core idea is actually to change the way and the methods with which the government works. And I think this could be a good starting point to get this started. And I would look to Finland and Denmark, actually. And I think size is not so important here. So Finland and Denmark.
Okay, great. You've already mentioned Christian's analysis of the ministerial division. So I want to, throw this to him and ask you, in your reading, and also taking into account this mirror ministry word or topic that Birgit has brought about, how would you see the organization, the governmental organization of this big climate change policy field? Is it, from a first reading, is it going to work? Where are the difficulties going to be? What would you advise them to do maybe better?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's a tough question because I actually don't know how they're going to organize exactly. So I know some of the rough outlines that we do know. I mean, a few things. So first of all, so there were several choices before they came with the coalition treaties, right? So they could have created a strong climate ministry. That's sort of what they did. Still, there are a lot of other relevant ministries, right? We don't have one super ministry, not one like in China. They have the National Development Reform Commission that used to do everything. We're not having this here, obviously. Still, so this is going to be a strong ministry. I really wonder what competences they're going to take from the BMU to this ministry, like the planning competencies, like emission projection analysis. There's a lot of the EU competence. It's not clear to me. Apparently, they're going to move everything in there. So that will be key. Birgit, you know things. That's good. So let's learn about that in a moment. Let me finish, perhaps before you chime in here. So this ministry will be key, but it will need to coordinate with the others. There's no question about this. It's not going to be able to do all the climate policy because you need to go into the sectoral nitty-gritty in almost each of the ministries. Like in the transport ministry, you need to take a look at the Bundesverkehrswegeplan, like the the plan for the road building, etc., for the next 10 to 20 years. All of this needs to be revised now, like the expansion of the different infrastructures, like the gas network, the electricity grid, the electric vehicle charging stations that will involve different ministries and also different governance levels. So that ministry, I assume, will be coordinating quite a lot and will be in the lead on quite a lot of things. I wonder how they're going to do it on different topics. To me, the big question is what's going to be the Chancellery's role? Because the alternative would have been you create a strong climate unit in the Chancellery, you consolidate some of the climate functions, perhaps in the environment ministry, and then you have the Chancellery doing the overall coordination, ensuring that processes have a start and an end, and you get to conclusion, and you get the policy in place, and in the end, the policy mix aligns with the targets. I have no idea if this is supposed to be the role, or if we're gonna have again a diffusion of responsibility that we had in the past, where really no one was responsible for climate policy in the government. Like the BMU tried, but they weren't really in charge, and they didn't have the competence or the political clout. And the Chancellery has up to now 2 persons being full-time employed on climate policy, so which is basically nothing. Yeah, there are people doing other stuff as well and tangential stuff, but for this being a major political challenge for Germany, and for this being like sort of the organizational center of government, has been heavily understaffed and hasn't worked. Also in practice, in talking to people, it hasn't worked at all, and it was a mismatch of tasks and resources. So I hope they're going to change that also within the Chancellery. I heard that there shall be someone like a Beauftragter für Klimapolitik, someone responsible within the Chancellery for coordination, but that's not confirmed at this stage. Birgit, perhaps you know more.
Not about. Thank you very much. Not about this future post, but what is very interesting. I think we have to consider also the personnel. We have to see who is going to head those ministries and what is behind it. I mean, we know that this new ministry for climate protection and also industrial policy has been tailored to suit the needs and the ambitions of Robert Habeck. He is going to be leading this ministry for sure. And initially he wanted to be finance minister. This is the post he coveted most because the Greens think that every single decision that is going to be taken in this huge transition process sooner or later starts or ends with the means, with the budget and with the finance minister. And that's why this post was very much coveted by the Greens. However, it was clear from the start that the FDP would not give up the finance ministry. This was the single big one prize they wanted for themselves and for their party chairman, Christian Lindner. And so Robert Habeck and people close to him tried to imagine a ministry that would very much come close to the same power, to the same clout, and it tried to sort of bring together different competences in this ministry. Christian, I haven't had a chance to look at it closely and less closely than you did, but this was the aim. And we know that Robert Habeck has been a minister already, unlike other people in this coalition. He was minister in Schleswig-Holstein. This is not a big Bundesland in Germany, but still, unlike others, he has a lot of experience in terms of governance. And what competences do you need to get things done and get things going? So I am quite confident that he made sure that in this new ministry, there will be a bundle of very important of key competences that will ensure that he can get things going. And another very important point relating to what Thurit said, there is a lot of trust and also a good working relationship between the heads of two future major ministries. On the one side, Robert Habeck, and then the Ministry for Traffic and Transportation that has been mentioned, and digitization is going to be headed by Volker Wissing from the FDP, and those two can and will work well together. So this is a good thing. But with all that Sigrid has told us, with all the potential rifts and different interests, it's going to be, my guess, a very rocky path towards this huge transition in Germany.
And we are happy that we are in the spectator seats for this, and we don't have to do it ourselves. Andrea, you want to come in?
I just have a quick question for Birgit. Birgit, are you sure that Wissing will be the minister? Because what I heard today is that he also wants to become fraction leader.
I am quite sure. This is what I was told today, and this was a big surprise for me and all the people. Yeah, we will see. But this is what I've been hearing all day long.
Okay, thanks.
You have your sources. But before we come again to the reading of the vote itself and the possible fault lines, also looking at the chat, there was one specific question about the phasing out of coal that Christian was asked to. So let's stick with the policies for a moment. I know, Christian, you already started to answer in the chat, but not everyone is able to listen and read at the same time. So give us a bit of a reading, because the phasing out of coal for everyone, I mean, this is something that the new government inherited as a principle, but then pulled forward. What is the background to this, and how do you think the parties can implement this ambitious goal?
Yeah, thank you, Cornelius, and thanks, Thomas, for the question. I think Thomas is also a former student who knows the background on this, because we discussed it in class. So the coal exit, I mean, this is turned really into a symbol of climate policy. I think more than it perhaps even deserves, because the situation in terms of policy is that we have this EU emissions trading system that covers the electricity sector and the industry sector, and we have a price for emissions there that each of the emitting units, like coal power plants in Germany, but also in Poland, need to pay. And this price has increased rapidly over the past 5 years, basically from 7 to today 70 euro. And at this price, coal plants actually are not profitable anymore, because running a gas plant and or renewable facilities is just cheaper, because for every ton of emitted coal CO2, you need to pay this, you need to buy such an allowance, which costs you 70 euro. And that, if that continues up to 2030, and all analysts expect this basically, it's because of market fundamentals in this cap and trade system, well, then that will kick out coal through this market mechanism, which is established by government. And this is why also there's this funny formulation in the coalition treaty of saying, ideally phasing out coal already works by 2030, ideally. And the ideal is that the market operates accordingly. The government doesn't exactly know how it will work. They can predict this setting. They cannot directly steer this. And the point was that the oil they negotiated coal exit didn't trust the carbon price. It was negotiated when they were very low at 7 euros instead of 70 euros, because the system was not working well. And so they wanted to use a different tool, like this negotiated phase out, and that is now redundant. You don't need it anymore. What you still have, and what is still making a difference, is sort of the compensations to workers, but also to companies if the coal plants are phased out. And now the idea will be to ensure that coal workers are compensated in parallel to this more market-driven coal phase out. Basically, this is what this is boiling down to now. Yeah, I hope that sort of brings it across. And I think it has perhaps gotten more attention and it has achieved more of a symbol status than it perhaps deserves at this point, because coal really seems to be pretty much dead now. And in general, with climate policy, I think we need to talk much more about transport and buildings in particular, and agriculture, then we are talking about renewable energies in the electricity sector, where I'm confident that we are on track. This is going to be managed as a huge community, policy-wise, professionally, in companies are on track, are on board, and want to run this transition. So I'm not very concerned about that sector. Transport, we have the car manufacturers who are on board, and the EU regulation will come in, everybody accepting that. So I'm at the high level and political economy level not too concerned. Buildings, I'm really concerned how we're gonna renovate this sector and exchange all the gas boilers and oil boilers and etc. And similar with agriculture. So there are huge challenges ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for already pointing to those, the fundamental challenges that are in this field. Sigrid, there was a question, and we get into the coalition mechanisms and the working of the coalition a little bit more. Sebastian, he asked in the chat that Christian Lindner said the traffic light coalition should want to get re-elected. Whether they actually get re-elected is a different story, but that they should have this aim, which is, again, quite remarkable, I would say, given how disliked the prospect of a traffic light, a three-party coalition this way was for many liberals just 2-3 months ago. How would you see this, first of all, the possibility given the setup, and also maybe with a view to some tactics? How can smaller parties like the FDP make sure they don't get hammered like they did in the references to 2009 to 2030? The FDP got kicked out of the Bundestag at the end. There has been this wariness, the liberals going into bed with the more left-leaning parties. What is your take on that?
Well, from the chat, I read that Sebastian is a big fan of the CDU-CSU and really hopes that the coalition is struggling very soon. I'm not so sure. I guess this is a completely different situation compared to 2013. I mean, the Greens and the Liberals have big arms, and the Social Democrats are really super dependent upon remaining the Chancellor Party. This is their last chance. I mean, let's just remember the trajectory of the Social Democrats until just a couple of months ago. It was just a way down, down, down. And this is their one, and I'd say even last chance to kind of be again in a sort of winning position. I mean, they always lamented that Merkel, that everything the Social Democrats did was written well to Merkel, and Merkel kind of cannibalized them. So nothing was left because Merkel took it all. But this is not true. I mean, this is a general mechanism that if you have coalition parties, most goodies are kind of subscribed by the voters because it's so complex. Who is really responsible for which policy? So the shortcut for the voter is it's the Chancellor. And the SPD and Scholz will do everything possible to have this coalition going on. And they will, as I said before, I mean, the Social Democrats are not voted because of their policies. They are voted because Scholz. So they can make lots of compromises, and they will make these compromises to let this coalition be alive. So I'm absolutely sure that will be for 4 years. We have this, whether it's re-elected is another question, but this coalition will not. So I'm sorry for Sebastian. I don't see really the CDU coming in there in the next few months. And I mean, just one last sentence about volatility. I mean, what you see about volatility is very clear. Just a couple of weeks before the election, the traffic light composition was among the least preferred by the public. But looking at polls now, the majority wants it. Partly this is of course because the public is sort of always a bit reluctant to accept new things, and now they jump on it. And the second reminder on volatility is that German voting behavior compared to our neighbors is still relatively stable. We shouldn't forget it. So I guess 50% of the vote is due to party identification. These people might once in a while change the party, as apparently some of CDU-CSU supporters did this time. But we are not in that world that tomorrow something completely different comes out than yesterday. It changes, but yeah, there is still an anchor of stability in our system, so we shouldn't get worried. And the CDU-CSU should, I guess, really prepare to be a constructive opposition with whomever leading them.
Thank you, Sigrid. And for a moment, I thought you knew Sebastian because you read so much into his question, but maybe he was asking for a friend. He now says that he's an SPD member and just asking about the development. But both
so he's just afraid.
But so both Sebastian and Andrea have been discussing, and Andrea, you want to come in on this question of the opposition, because it's one thing to talk about the government.
I want to challenge Sigrid a little bit on her notion of stability. Sigrid, I very much like your analysis about the two parties, the FDP and the Green parties, being the parties who need to deliver on policies, and Scholz has to deliver on leadership. By the way, that's exactly why he was voted into office. He ran an incumbent campaign. But I very much buy into the argument on the CDU. Yes, constructive opposition, but don't forget, it takes two to tango. If the traffic light coalition does not sort of live up to its promises in the next year or two, right? They will drop in approval ratings, and that could be a chance again for the CDU. And that brings me to the second point, to the volatility. I slightly disagree on your analysis there, Sigrid, because if I, for example, look at the sort of the last 15 months, right? The last 15 or 16 months. And if I look at I mean, that's not voting, that's not volatility in terms of votes, but volatility in terms of public opinion, what we, measure all the time. And if you look at the CDU there, the CDU dropped from, if you look at into April, May, June 2020, the CDU was almost on an all-time high with 40%, and then dropped to 24%, right? If you see the volatility within the Greens, so that's why I don't really buy into that stability argument. I know your answer now. Your answer is we're talking about elections, not about opinion polls.
No, if I may,
go hand in hand.
Just one sentence. I guess, Andrea, we are really close to each other. I mean, I'm talking about 50% stability and 50% volatility, yeah? And 50% volatility,
okay, I didn't get the 50%.
Really enough to make exactly these changes we are talking about. But it's not 100% volatility, yeah? Mm-hmm. So just to keep it a little bit in balance. That was my argument. I mean, each election, I said it at the beginning, each subsequent election is characterized by more volatility. Mm. So we are on this track, but there is still sort of a segment of stability. Which is slowly, of course, the change in the polls and in the election results is due to the other 50%.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought we had an argument here, but there is again, 50% argument, 50% really. Agreement. Okay, I'd like to encourage. We've dealt with a couple of questions in the chat. Please feel free to come back to that instrument if you have any points you would like to raise, criticisms or questions. For the moment, I would like to ask once more about the free party issue, and besides the voter intentions that may change, but how is a free party government going to work, and how is this so much different from what we know? Here, maybe we can look at the Länder level, where we have had free party coalitions and actually have free party coalitions right now, even a traffic light coalition. But is this Is this really such a big thing? Is it going to be difficult? Some of you have already said that you would, give them 4 years anyway, straight. Maybe Turid and Birgit, what is your reading of this meta topic? Can three parties form a coalition in Germany where we've only had 2 so far? Birgit, you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much, Cornelius. I mean, we have had 3-party coalitions, if you count the CSU, the Christian
yes,
Social Democrats, and they actually have behaved for long periods of time as a very unruly coalition partner. But in fact, it is very unusual. And it relates to what Sigrid and Andrea just pointed out. I mean, the so-called people's parties in Germany, the 2 traditional people's parties, large parties, the CDU, CSU, and the SPD, the Social Democrats, have been constantly shrinking. And the last big win by Angela Merkel with a result over 40% was in 2013. And then came the refugee crisis and many more crises. And we have witnessed the rise of a right-wing party in Germany, the AfD. We haven't talked about the AfD, which is very interesting because it hasn't played a big role in the last election, which was very, very surprising, which comes to show that policy and what moves people do play an important role in electoral campaigns. And I think, and this would be a question for Sigrid, my take is that social security was a very important main issue in this campaign, combined with stability, which very much played in favor of Olaf Scholz, who was basically the poster child of stability and Mr. Merkel 0.2, basically. But it's really interesting. When I was listening to him today, I got this feeling, wow, can someone be even more toned down than Angela Merkel and more sort of sober and technocratic? And after listening to him for 5, 6, 7 minutes, I got a little bored, and I'm very interested in politics. So I'm not sure how this is going to play out. And on his side, he has Robert Habeck, the philosopher in this new coalition, who will basically be in charge of the narrative. And if they're lucky, this could play out. This will probably be the part of Robert Habeck to explain what holds these 3 parties together. And Christian Lindner, who has always been a little jealous of the rhetoric qualities Robert Habeck has, he very much, I don't know if you have noticed as well, but he has changed his tune a little bit. And he also tries to paint the greater picture and be more than just the party of tax cuts, basically. The one issue party is passé. I mean, the FDP also now wants to stand for a bigger narrative. So I'm really, really looking forward to seeing how this is going to play out, because it is an experiment, even though this is a strong word. And Germany is not a small Nordic country. Germany is the largest economy in the European Union, and all the neighboring countries around, my country, Austria, foremost, need this Germany to be stable, reliable, readable. And since this Germany is going to speak with 3 strong voices now, and there is a vacuum to fill, because Angela Merkel, who is really leaving very, very big shoes, and this leaves a vacuum on the European level. We haven't been talking about Europe. It's come up in one of the questions. This is a discussion that has been totally lacking. I mean, Germany talks about Germany and the big German transformation, but no one talks about the role Germany will be playing in Europe and in the world in the future. This is very, very important. There has been I mean, Olaf Scholz has pointed out that obviously Germany is going to be a reliable member of the European Union, but this was just window dressing. These issues remain to be filled with life and policy, and Europe will be watching very, very, very closely.
Indeed, and this has also come up in the chat with a couple of questions. One going in the direction of Christian and climate policy, but before Turit, you wanted to come in.
Yes, also on the numbers. Actually, I'm following Sigrid's analysis. I would rather think that it's not so crucial that it's 3 parties, but the real tension is rather on, or I think this is the question on how will the Greens and the Liberals actually come along in day-to-day government, right? And here I think, and this goes back to what Birgit had just been saying, I think perhaps this Scholz style may be helpful in sort of, balancing the two beasts here, so to speak, with his calm, approach, and so that may be helpful. At the same time, however, that may collide with some more of the leadership requirements, particularly now when it comes to the pandemic and what's expected there also in terms of communication and so on. So let's see. I wouldn't. I think I wouldn't dare to predict on how long this is going to hold. But for now, yeah. But perhaps also one thing to the size and the country size, because I said earlier, my recommendation would be to look to Finland and Denmark. That, however, refers to administrative reform and how to structure a government, right? That is important. In general, in terms of politics and the overall power play, of course, I mean, I would fully agree, of course, size and power, that is important. But when it comes to how to set up a government and how to run a government in terms of structures and processes, I think it's not so important, because the requirements or the challenges the countries are confronted with are similar, no matter whether it's Germany or any other of the EU member states. The European industrialized Western states are confronted with similar policy challenges, and that is what they need to set up their governments for in terms of structures and organizational effectiveness.
Great, and let's stay with Europe for a moment and mix it as one of the questions has done, or two, I believe, even with the field of climate policy. Christian, you already said that the targets are set by the EU. This is where the framework within which Germany will work. But there was also a specific question about international climate diplomacy. You mentioned carbon pricing, but there is talk of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is something which would very much impact on the relations that the EU has with partners, with the United States, with neighboring countries in Africa, Northern Africa, with Asian countries. So is there enough of an understanding also in Germany how Europeanized climate policy will have to be, and is this government up to that?
On your last question, no and yes, at least I hope. I don't think it's appreciated how European climate policy is. We had not having this discussion in Germany at all. It's an interesting topic for discussion why that is the case. One barrier is certainly complexity. So I spent around 6 seminar sessions to explain to students the structure of European climate policy. I know that ministers, Angela Merkel, did not understand very important laws that were passed by the EU simply because it's too detailed, too complex. The Green Deal is, I think, 4,500 pages. I don't know that, I'm not sure anybody really understands the entire thing, and even Commission people are telling me that. So that's a huge barrier. It's a super complex topic, and it has been hard to organize a public discussion around this, also because, of course, very detached and technocratic. It's as technocratic as it gets. So there is a strong expert discussion and community, but in terms of public debate, not much is happening. And from a climate policy perspective, it has been convenient even, I think, because you have a relatively strong progressive general mode in the EU institutions, so in the parliament, even in the council, and you've been able to do a lot of relatively progressive climate policy that in Germany we would have never had without the EU. So like the emission trading system in Germany, this was all against the opposition of Germany. And the European Union has been a very important driver here, but the coalition treaty again is a testament. There's this reference to the Fit for 55 package, and that's about it. And all the heavy lifting is going to happen in there, and we don't need to bother the citizens with all this detail. So this is a bit the story to me here. Of course, there are important domestic things we need to do in Germany, but really the core is more and more at the EU level. Now, internationally, beyond the borders of the European Union, this is all very important, even though we've seen at the recent COP, once again, I mean, China and the US are really the decisive players here. The European Union has a problem in bringing its weight to the table, given its governance structure itself and to coordinate itself. Even though it is a key player in international climate diplomacy, but it could be more powerful. And even the German government, I really hope that also in terms of the governance of our climate policy or climate diplomacy, we will get more professional, align the development ministry, the GIZ, and the environmental ministry, which is formally in charge of our international climate policy, to use the resources of the embassies and to align them with our development policy in a very coordinated and strategic way. Also, we need to get much more strategic. We are not strategic as Germany, and sometimes also as an EU in bringing other partners on board and organizing coalitions and providing also sticks and carrots to advance climate policy in other regions. So I think we can do more there. The Climate Club is, of course, a pet idea of Olaf Scholz out of the finance ministry. Let's see what exactly it means. So in the coalition treaty, again, it's quite lofty. So let's see, of course, this carbon border adjustment that the EU has proposed, that we put imports of emission intensive goods on the same carbon pricing level as the goods produced within the European Union, and we apply the same carbon price to steel that is imported as we have done steel that is produced within the EU. I think that is an important initiative by the EU. I think it will happen, but there is going to be there needs to be a lot of international coalition building around that to avoid a trade war emerging from that, which has always been the concern and still remains a concern, that this has been seen and also used as a protectionist instrument in the end. So we need to be very careful in advancing this internationally. My sense is that the Scholz team has this very much on their radar, and people very close to him developed this idea. But yeah, then again, there's more to international climate policy than the Climate Club, but I think it's a useful initiative.
Thank you. No, and this is indeed a highly complex issue, and we could go more into this, but we are approaching the end, and there is one question by Fiorella Catalina that I would like to put out and ask you for some concluding thoughts. I mean, if this were to work out with our traffic light coalition, the three-party coalition, with the reforms that they have planned over the next 4 years, how much of an example could that be? Do other countries really look at Germany in that way? Is this something that we should keep in mind when going about these reforms? Of course, being less navel gazing with our own issues, but also because this could serve as an example for other countries. Why don't we, do this as a quick concluding round? Turid, I'll begin again with you, Christian, Sigrid, and Birgit, and then we'll finish us off.
Well, I'm not sure in how this traffic light coalition could serve as an example or role model for other countries as well. But understanding Fiorella's question also as a question of impact and what will other parts of the world sort of feel or realize, perhaps the fact that we get a new female foreign minister. with perhaps some special attention on foreign on questions of equality, empowering women, and so on in foreign policy as well.
Thank you, Christian.
Stick to the climate policy area. So if we can demonstrate that this can be made to work here in Germany, that would be useful. Or the other way around, if we cannot, that would be very unuseful. And in particular, leading the EU with this very heterogeneous countries and very different levels of income to an ambitious climate policy that works, implementing the social transfers across Europe also, which need to come from Europe to get Bulgaria, Romania, etc. on board, is a very important experiment for multilateral climate policy that everybody is watching. And I think the EU needs to be successful on that, and then to transfer some of these lessons to the multilateral arena would be extremely valuable, I think. And here the coalition could really make a huge difference now in the next 1 to 2 years.
Thank you. Sigrid?
Yeah, it's always a little bit the question, are we arrogant and believe that what we do is really sort of important for the rest of the world? So I tend to agree with Turit. It's the little small signals. So I'd also say that maybe a foreign minister who is outspokenly skeptic towards Russia, for example, will have some impact and may kind of change the debate we have. And with regard to climate and climate policies, I'd rather say it's a bit of the duty of the industrial nations who sort of caused the whole mess, just to be try to give an example. If other countries that take it up or not, this is nothing we can sort of be sure. But we should be an example, try it for ourselves, because we were among those who caused the problem.
Excellent, thank you. Birgit.
Well, as a foreign correspondent of so many years, I can tell you, I can assure you, Germany is and will be closely watched by its neighbors, of course. And I mean, it's no mean feat to bring about such a transition in Europe's biggest economy. So yeah, you will be watched and maybe taken as an example. And I would like to re-emphasize what Christian said. Failure is not an option. It would be indeed disastrous, not only for Germany, but also for Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to all four of you, and also Andrea, who has had to sneak out quietly. Thank you for an engaging discussion. Thank you to everyone who participated in the debate, especially also in the chat. We heard a number of ideas and insights into where we are with this new coalition. It's not yet there. We still have to wait for early December to actually talk about it, but the stars appear to have aligned. We heard about a new sense of collegiality emerging. We heard about voter coalitions, interesting voter coalitions that are pushing issues like the climate change policies. We heard about a narrative to dare more progress, to advance collectively of interesting cross-party coalitions, which may not be possible in other more polarized societies. So I take it in these times, I take it as a sign of hope, and I encourage everyone, in your various positions, to make this transformational change possible from whatever vantage point you have. So with that, thanks again, everyone. Have a good evening, stay healthy, and see you soon at the Hertie School.